So here we are with our preview playing, and we need to add a little bit of animation to this. And what I was thinking was, if we just have a rocket ship on top of a counter, well, that's kind of an interesting visual effects shot, I suppose. Trying to make a CG element fit into a photographic plate, and that's a bit of a challenge. But I like to add a little bit of story, a little bit of interest to this. And if you're doing shots for a reel, for example, a shot like this is going to catch someone's attention a lot more if it has a little bit of story to it. So I thought we'd add a little bit of story and character to this. And what I thought was, here's a person walking up to this toy sitting on a counter. And what if the hatch was open? And as the person approached, and the person being you, the viewer, as you approach, the door slammed closed, and then maybe the wings would adjust a little bit, and then maybe some rocket smoke would come out the bottom and it would start taking off. So I thought that would, on the one hand, not only be more interesting, but also show off a little bit more technical prowess with a bit of particle animation as well. So with all that in mind, let's start animating. So looking at our preview, trying to figure out the timing of our animation, we want to be able to give our viewers a little bit of time to establish what they're looking at before we carry on with the animation. So I figure we go about halfway through, maybe around frame 120, before we slam the door and adjust the wings a little bit, and then have the ship start to take off. Maybe around 100, we'll start slamming the door. So let's go to frame 100. And let's take a look at our hatch here, which is what we want to rotate. So there I have the rocket ship hatch. I'll just check it out in the scene editor. Rocket ship hatch. I have the rotate parent. I want to rotate that. You may recall that we set the hatch up to rotate properly on its heading axis so that it'll open and close properly. So let's just take a perspective view and get a closer look. So here's where it is, and we know that at a frame 100 it needs to be open. So we're going to open it up all the way open to its limit, and we want to open our graph editor and make sure that it's open at the beginning as well. So we'll take our frame 0, just left click to select it, and we want to make its value the same as this, so -177. Copy this, go over to the previous frame and paste it in. Or I could have simply deleted this frame 0 as well, and that would work just equally as well. So now, from the beginning of the shot right up to frame 100, it's all the way open. It stays open. We need to animate it slamming closed. So how fast do we want to slam it closed? Well, we won't really know. We want it to close in maybe half a second. So let's say 12 frames. And we'll slam it closed. And we'll look at our graph editor, because this is a really linear motion, and we like a little bit of ease in. We'll ease into it, and we want it to stop suddenly when it hits. So let me just try to get a better look at that curve. So we want to. So what I did to ease this in was I set the tension to 1. You could do this with Bezier curves, but ease in and ease out is really incredibly simple using simple TCB splines. Simply grab the curve, set the tension to 1, and it's perfectly eased in. And we don't want to ease it out. We want to really push it out so that it eases in and then stops abruptly as it slams. So we may even want to do a little bounce on that slam. But first, let's just look at this frame range. We'll say frame. We'll make a preview from maybe frame 80 to 120. So I'll go make preview 80 to 120. Okay, we'll see what happens. Slam. So you see how it kind of slowly starts to slam and then speeds up? That indicates that it has a little bit of weight. And it is definitely stopping very linearly, like very computer generated. So I think we definitely do need to give it a little bit of bounce. And I'd also like it to be going a little bit faster when it slams. So I'll open my graph editor. Again, look at this curve. And in order to draw this down more, I either need to switch it to a Bezier curve, or I can add another keyframe in here, and all I need to do is be on the plus key tool. Just drag that down a little bit. Maybe I'll push it out. I can push it out here, and then I can. It's the curve seems to be leaning to one side, and leaning is bias, so I can pull the bias back a little bit and try and smooth that out, and then see how that looks. Maybe add a little bit of tension to that as well, and then we'll try that one out. Oops, that's not what I want. I want to make my preview once again from 80 to 120. Slam. That's a little bit faster slam. A little more abrupt. Part of the purpose here is I really want to draw people's eyes to the fact that this thing is moving. Now I want it to bounce once when it closes. You can do that in a graph editor very easily. I'm just getting close here, and we need a curve that goes something like this. So we can simply add a key. Let's see, here and here. And I definitely want to sharpen this one up. So I can use the continuity tool to sharpen that right up. You can see that, push that right down, so it's going bang, bang. And I'm going to throw some negative tension on there. And you see when I changed the continuity on here, it kind of took the nice curve out of our curve here. So I'm going to just try removing this key. No, that doesn't work for me. Maybe I just need to change its position. That's just not a very good choice. There we go. So pushing out negative tension and then drawing this key a little higher. There, that feels a lot better. So now I have a nice swoop into a slam and then a bounce. And let's see how that actually looks in the animation. Make another preview. Boom. I'll play that at speed. Okay, it's too fast to notice, and it's also coming too far open. So we definitely need to slow that down a little bit. Open the graph editor again. I'll just zoom in on these keys. So that's frame 112, 113, and 114. So let's, instead of making one frame in between there, let's make it two. So this will need to be 116. And this key will need to become 114, and it's also opening a little much. So I'm going to half that. Once again, make a preview, check it out. I think that's feeling a little bit better. Boom. Still maybe a little bit too fast. I think I'm going to slow it down one more frame and see if that works. So this is a fairly typical process of trying to get the right feel for animation. So this needs to become 118. This needs to become 115. Halfway in between. And try the same thing again. Now, every time I make a preview, you may notice that I have to set the beginning and end frame range. I could actually not have to do that simply by setting a limited frame range here in my timeline. Now when I make the preview, it automatically goes to those that range. Okay, that feels pretty good. So now I want to look at it from the camera view, because it's obviously a lot smaller in actual camera. I'm going to select something other than the camera so we don't see the rotation handle. And we'll make a preview here as well. You need to actually be able to tell from your camera view whether or not this is going to work. Okay, let's have a look at that. That definitely works. It reads quite well. All right, so we'll go with that for now. And next thing we want to do a little adjustment to our wings. So what I want to do is first have the hatch slam closed, then have the wings adjust, then have the rocket engines fire. So the hatch is fully closed at frame, well, we can even call it 115, and we can leave the bounce just as an additional detail. So at 115 we're going to have the wings start adjusting. So look at my scene editor here, and you notice I've color coded my inner wings. My right wings are red and my left wings are green. So inner wings first. I'm going to do inner followed by outer, and all I want it to do is do a little kind of like a test. You know, somebody's fired up the control mechanisms and it's going to run through all of its tests before it takes off. So I'll just extend this out to the end. I'll actually go back from 115 where it's going to start, and I automatically have the since I'm in rotation and I've limited rotation to only the pitch, I have the pitch control handle right in front of me. That's good. So I want it to move back and forth noticeably, say take half a second to do its whole gig. So 115 to 121 is a quarter of that. I want it to rotate. Well, first I have to set a keyframe at 115, and I'm only going to set it on the pitch channel. And then at frame 121, I'm going to set I have auto key on. So in order to create a keyframe, I don't have to hit the enter key. I can just make a motion. So I'm going to go one direction, and then 6 frames further I'm going to go the other direction. So I went 16.8 degrees, and then at 127 I'm going to go about the same amount in the opposite direction. And then 6 frames later I'm going to have it correct back to center, back to 0. Now here's a cool feature in Lightwave 10. I don't have to go and open the graph editor and find this channel. I can just click right on the envelope right next to the pitch channel and it'll go straight to it. And here's the curve that I've made. Now I want to make sure that I don't have any motion before frame 115. So I'm going to tighten up my tension on that. And I want it to ease out at the end, so I'm going to tighten up my tension on that. Now this should be a nice kind of mechanical looking rotation. So let's set this to 135, and let's make a preview and see how that's looking. Okay, that feels pretty good and it's quite noticeable. So I want to do exactly the same motion on all the other 3 wing panels, but I want them to be slightly offset. I want to push them a little bit forward, say 3 frames forward each. So what I'll do is I'll open the graph editor for the motion that we just did. I'm going to right click over here and I'm going to copy this channel. Now I'm going to go to my left inner wing, and I'm going to open its pitch envelope, and I'm going to paste this right in here. And on top of that, I'm going to grab all the frames and I'm just going to push them forward 3 frames. And I'm going to copy this one. I'm going to close it. I'm going to go back to the right outer, same thing. Go to the envelope, paste it, select all the frames, and I'm going to push them forward 3 frames. I'm going to copy this one, and I'm going to go to the other outer, open its pitch envelope, paste the curve in, and same thing again, select all the keys and push them forward 3 frames. Alright, so now let's take a look at what that looks like. my preview. Well, let's actually I need to look at the last swing. This probably goes to around 150-ish. And let's just make that preview to 150. See what it looks like. Okay. Yeah, that looks like kind of a little test sequence. Alright, so now we have a door slam and we have our wings doing a little test sequence. Let's look at what that whole thing looks like from around frame 80. Alright, play. Slam is the first thing you notice, and a little test sequence. So this is starting to feel like somebody is inside it, and that's the idea we want to get across. It. It's a toy sitting there, and the door slams. Things start moving. It's like, oh, wait a minute, is this a real rocket ship? So this is the question that we want to raise with our viewer. We really want them to start by seeing this as a toy sitting on a counter, and then switching to wondering whether or not it's a real rocket ship with tiny little aliens inside. So that's kind of the interesting little story. We're not really going to answer that, but the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have this rocket ship take off. So around frame, well, let's see. Let's just see exactly when the test sequence ends. It ends right around frame 140. So I think around frame 135 we're going to fire up the rocket engines. So what we need to do is say around 135 the rocket engines are going to fire up. So around frame 140 the rocket body itself is going to start lifting off. So select the rocket body. Let's drop a keyframe down on 140 to make sure that it is on the ground at 140. And then we have up to 225 frames here. So let's have the ship go out of view at the very last frame. T for translate. Let's push it so that it is just out of view at that frame. Okay, now because we haven't set any controls on this curve, of course the ship is going to drop down below before frame 140, so we need to open up our graph editor, look at our Y position, and once again we need to ease that out, or ease it in rather. We want it to be accelerating on the way out, so put negative tension on here, and we'll see how that looks. And we actually need to make a preview of it, so we'll do a preview from, say, frame 130, 225. And we'll see how that motion feels. Should be start with a nice slow lift off, and then accelerate as it gets higher, which looks like that's what it's doing. It might not be accelerating quite fast enough. Let's take a look at full speed. I guess that's okay. And you know, it might be nice to have a rotate. Actually, what might be nice is if it rotates so that we get our little logo in view at the back as it rotates out of camera. So we don't want it rotating too fast. So let's begin with it rotated a little bit in view anyways. So we'll go to the rocket ship's graph editor. And I'm going to make this a little smaller so I can see the ship at the same time. Look at its heading position. And its initial heading position has 2 keyframes. It doesn't rotate, so we'll start. Now we'll set this to frame 140, which is its initial motion position. And we're going to change its rotation value, maybe something like that. And actually that's cool because the hatch now, when it's wide open, will be more visible, because you'll see back here, you can see the hatch wide open. So it's going to slam out of view. So it'll actually, that makes the hatch even more visible when it closes. As the ship begins to rise, we can have it rotate slightly. So let's have it consistently rotate so that by the time it's here, we want to see its heading, maybe something like that. I want it to continue to rotate when it's out of view, but I don't want to have to try to figure out what that should be mathematically, so there's a really easy way to do that. You just open the graph editor, look at the heading channel, and you can see how it kind of just ends. I want it to continue in a line after that. That's easy. There's something here called post behavior. There's pre-behavior and post behavior. If I set post behavior to linear, it'll just carry on forever at that rotation. And that's a really quick way of having a motion continue without having to figure out what the frame needs to be, what the value needs to be at whatever frame. Now you notice that when it starts moving, it starts rotating immediately. We also want to ease that rotation in. We don't want it to start rotating linearly from the beginning. So let's open up that heading graph again. Make it a little larger so we can see it a little bit better. And we're going to ease this in. So once again, we'll simply tighten up our tension. And that should ease that rotation in, so it starts rotating slowly as it starts rising slowly as well. That looks pretty good. So let's take a look at our whole, starting from frame 1, let's take a look at our whole animation here and see if that works for us. Let's make the preview 1 to 125 again. Okay, so here's our preview. So we're walking over, the door slams, a little test sequence, and it lifts off right away. That's pretty neat. You know, I'm actually kind of feeling like we could delay the liftoff for a little bit. It doesn't really give us much time in between, and there's plenty of time at the end for it to lift off. So I want to delay the motion, the rise and rotation motion of that rocket by maybe a second. So let's grab the rocket body, open its graph editor, and let's take a look at the Y and heading channels. These are both at frame 140. Let's just make that 164. And let's take another look at it. I'll make another preview. I'll be right back. Okay, here's our new preview with the later liftoff and rotation. And when I look at this, I like the delay with the rotation, but now I like the delay with the liftoff, but now the rotation feels like it's going a little bit too fast. I think it needs to lift off first, gain a little bit of height, and then start rotating. So let's try that. Again, grab the rocket body, open up the graph editor, and let's look at our heading channel and see what we can do here. So maybe this shouldn't start rotating at exactly the same frame. Let's push this out to frame 170. And that's going to make this a lot steeper. So it means the rotation is going to be faster, so I'm going to reduce its value a little bit. All we want to do is get the, out at the end here, is get the logo to be visible. So let's just go to that last frame. Well, let's go to, yeah, I think it's going to be visible there. So it starts lifting off. Actually going to put a little negative tension into this just to try to get that rotation a little slower to start. And that's definitely rotating a lot farther than we need it to make the logo visible. So I can actually bring this value back a bit. A little less rotation will be fine. Okay, so I'm going to set my frame range to start at 140. We'll do another preview and see how that's looking. Okay. So it's lifting off, and then you can see it kind of linearly starts rotating after the liftoff. I guess that's okay. That'll work for now. Now, of course, there's more things you can animate than simply the motion of objects. We can also animate lights and illumination. And one of the ideas I had in mind for this antenna up top. Well, let's just go into perspective view and take a closer look at that antenna. One of the ideas I had for the antenna was that it could maybe blink before takeoff. So maybe start with a few short blinks, blink, 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 and then go to maybe to solid just as the engines start or something like that. So let's figure out the timing of that. Going back to our full frame range and to our camera view, we know that the engines start at 140. And the blinks, which should probably coincide with the test sequence of the wings, maybe right after the hatch slam. So the hatch slams right at frame 112, and we can start our blinking sequence. So what we need to do here, oh, and we want it to be solid by the time the rockets start, probably around 140 or maybe shortly after that. Maybe say 145. So we have a frame range, let's call it 110 to 145. So we have 35 frames in which to do a little blinking sequence on our antenna material. So this is handled in the surface editor. There it is right there. There's our antenna. And we need to do this on the luminous node. So let's open up the envelope for luminous and agree that frame 0 is going, or a value of 0 is going to extend to frame 110. And then it needs to be fully luminous by 145. Let's say 150. Gives us a little bit of extra space. This is where it's going to be 100% luminous. Now, right now, we just have a totally linear increase. We don't want that to happen. We want a bunch of bounces to happen. Slower and then farther apart. So the way I would approach this is by starting at the end where it needs to be fully bright and going backwards and starting, say, 1 frame apart, then 2 frame apart, then 3 frames apart, then 4 frames apart, 5 frames apart, and seeing how many we get until we get back here. So to begin with, let's make our curves stepped because we want this to be really stepped sudden motions. Let's see if we can do this entirely in our graph editor before we try it out. So I want to get nice and big here, and we want to get our sequence as big as we can. So we'll start with a frame on 149 and then a frame on 148, and this one should be 100. You notice that the new curve I created was automatically TCB spline. Well, I want all of the curves in here to be stepped rather than TCB, and I don't want to have to go and switch them all to stepped all the time. So I'm going to go to my options. I'm going to make my default incoming curve stepped, and I'll switch this one to stepped right now. And now that my default is stepped, these are always going to be stepped whenever I make them. So now I'll add keyframes. This one's 148. This one should be 146. Good. And this one's 145, so this one should be, oops. Next one should be 144. 142 actually. So we're making the spaces in between longer, and each on period is going to be 1 frame. So this one needs to be 147, and so this should be 145. This one should be 144, and then this one should be 141, and then the next one should be 140. So that was 3. Let's see. See if I can get this right. So it should be something like this. Oh, looks like I've made a mistake in the middle here. Okay, so I figured it out. I have 1 space, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then I had a little bit left over, so I put an extra 1 in there. And I want to make sure that my keys are all at 100% sure, value 100, and I want to make sure they're all 0 down here, value 0. So basically I have this light just starting to blink on mechanically, and I'm going to turn off my light just so I can see it working, and I'll make that preview in that frame range of about frame range is about, well, let's call it 100 to 160, and we'll see if that little blinky light is working for us. Okay, let's play that at speed and see how that looks. Okay, so the short space at the beginning isn't working so well. It's making it look a little erratic, kind of like a fluorescent tube starting on. And then I think it comes on to full luminance too fast, so I think we need to have a few more flashes at the end, maybe another half dozen or so. So let's do that. Go back to the graph editor. Sorry, not to the graph editor, to the surface editor first. We need to get the specific channel we're looking for. Open up the envelope, and we'll add a few more blinks towards the end here. So it should be pretty straight ahead to add a few blinks. With this set to stepped, so I went 1 frame too far. Again, a frame too far. Okay, let's see how that looks. And I'm going to go back to the beginning here and push our first blink back until it feels like the right distance. That feels pretty good. Okay, let's try that again. Same frame range, and make the preview. That feels better. Let's just make sure it stays on at the end here. Yep, I had it stay on, I had it end at frame 160, and let's make sure these values are all the same as well. Value 100. And you know, an interesting idea might be to not have all of these at exactly all going all the way off towards the end. I can actually have this curve upwards. That might be kind of interesting. So I'm going to grab my move tool, and I'll just, oops, I grabbed all of them. Didn't want to do that. Just want to grab the one, move it up to maybe halfway. I can just play with these curves by eye. Try to make it a nice kind of acceleration curve. Until it feels about right. And of course, physical exactness doesn't matter that much, but that feels like a fairly decent curve. Let's try that. I'm just going to extend my frame range by 10 as well, so that we can see it stay on. And let's watch that blink again. All right. So adding the luminous curve from 0 at the bottom uh, also helps it make it feel like it's kind of powering up and coming on. So that's feeling pretty good there for that. Let's turn our light back on. And I'm interested to see how that reads, how the luminosity reads in a render. So I'm going to turn our VPR on. Oh, and I'm also going to save our scene. And I'm going to call this one anim. And I'm going to call it 04 to know that it came after all of the other ones. Alright, so that luminosity is not reading very well in a render. And I want it to read really well. So I'm going to go back to my surface editor, look at my upper value, and I might have to crank my upper value way up. Let's just get these all in view. Take our upper values and see how high we need to go to get them to read. Let's try 200%. Let's try 1000%. Okay, so what I've just discovered is that if when you make luminosity changes, for example, I'll take this back to 0. It doesn't really update in VPR yet. Remember, VPR is in its very first version with Lightwave 10, and there's a lot of work to be done that is being done to improve and add features to VPR. So this is just one of the things that currently isn't automatically updating. You just have to scroll your just a frame back and forth using your arrow keys to get it to update. So when I set this to 1000%, I see that and I scroll it back and forth just to update my VPR, I can see that I am getting some really nice illumination from there. Now I'm wondering if I could get a little bit of color into that illumination as well. So let's look at our nodes, where our surface is coming from. And here it is, it's a dielectric node. And its color right now is gray. So I'm kind of thinking a nice cyan might do the trick. Let's see if we can make that happen. Okay, so there's a nice, pretty nice looking little cyan illumination happening there. I like that. So I'm just going to leave that for now. So now we have this little cyan antenna, this kind of dielectric plastic, transparent plastic antenna that's lighting up and, you know, during the startup sequence for our rocket. Now I kind of feel like another thing that's going to be necessary is some kind of running lights. And of course I'm going to put running lights on this because I'm a lighting guy and I love lots of lights. And I was thinking the tips of these wings would be perfect spots for nice little running lights. I could put a point light on the end. That's one way to do it. And in order to make the light visible, I would then want to turn on a lens flare to make it into a visible light source. And that's one way I could go. On the other hand, I could also add a texture on the bottom end of the wings and call those lights. So I think I am going to go ahead with the texture method. In order to do this, I need to go back into the modeler and make a new material on those tips, because currently they're just part of the wing. So let's bring up our layer editor, our layers panel here, so we can take a look at all our layers, which are conveniently well named. And we're interested in our wings. So let's look at our 4 wing layers. So I want to start, actually they're in just the right order, inner, outer, Actually, I want to go outer, inner, inner, outer. So I want to start at the right hand side and work my way across. So I'm going to start with the outer right, and conveniently there are some polygons right on the tip that will make a perfect little kind of light bulb source. So I'm going to name this wing light 1, and then I'm going to go to the inner right. I'm going to do the same thing once again. There are polygons at the very end, and I'm going to name them wing light 2. Now I'm going to go to inner left. Same thing, I'm going to name them wing light 3, and I'm going to go to the outer left and name this material wing light 4 and save. So now when I pop back into layout, just give the VPR a moment to update, and we can see, if we go to our perspective view, that our 4 wing tips now have a different material on them. So the question needs to be, what color do we want these lights to be? How do we want them to appear to our viewers? And I'm kind of thinking, well, we'll just start with something simple. We'll start with a simple red light, and we'll see how that works for us. So open my surface editor. There's my 4 wing colors. I'll just make this one a nice primary red to begin with. And that's this one right over here. And I want to change its luminosity. So I'm going to open its graph editor, and I know that I want it to, what I want to do, my idea is that I want them to blink in sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And they should start when the startup sequence starts, and they should just repeat. So the startup sequence starts around, well, let's take a look. I forget exactly where it starts. Go to our camera view, back into shaded solid mode for speed. Go to our full frame range. And the startup, let's see, the door slams here, and then the startup sequence starts around 1:15. So we'll open our surface editor and our graph editor again, and this is around where we want it to start. So we're going to take our 0 value and move that to 1:15, and then we want it to blink once and then pause in the time it takes the other 3 lights to blink. So once again, we want this to be stepped, and we'll add a, on 1:16, we want the value to be 100, and let's just get all these in view. We want it to last maybe 1:16 to, we'll call it 1:18. We'll let it stay on for 2 frames. See how that looks, and then it'll go off on frame 1:19. I can actually delete this key. Now I want this to repeat. So once again, I can go to my post behavior and tell it to repeat. But now my repetitions are too close. So I need to set another key out here somewhere, however far I want this to, the repetition to occur. And this is going to be on for 2 frames, and let's say it's going to take 2 frames each for the other ones to go. So we'll go from 1:18 to 1:20 for the next light, 1:20 to 1:22, 1:22 to 1:24, and then maybe we want to wait for a beat. So let's say 4 frames. So we want this sequence to start again at frame 128. So I'll move this key out to 128. And now, if we zoom out, we can see the sequence starts where we want it to start, and it'll repeat every, whatever that is, 8, 10 frames or so. All right. So we don't want to have to recreate this for each of the other lights. So once again, we'll simply copy this channel, right click, copy, and actually we can copy and paste this to these other frames, these other surfaces right now. So they all have the exact same thing. And now what we want to do is move the envelope along for each one of these. So we'll zoom in here. We want to push this along 2 frames so that what's on frame 117 goes over to, or it starts on frame, what's on frame 115 goes over to 117. So grab all of these, push them over, and then we want to move this set along 4 frames so that this frame 115 ends up on frame 119. And then this one needs to go 6 frames. All right. So let's see how that's working for us. We'll just do a sequence starting at, let's say 100. All right, we'll make the preview. So you can see this is starting to add some interesting complexity to this scene. And they're just going to continue to blink in sequence as the ship lifts off and goes out of frame. Okay, let's watch that at speed. Yep, I'm liking that. Okay, good stuff. Now before we move on, we just need to take a last look at these 4 surfaces and make sure that they're good materials. Right now they're not specular, they're not smooth, so we need to make sure to turn on smooth. We want them to feel plasticky. So let's turn up the glossiness. Not too glossy, and let's turn down the specularity, which of course means specular intensity. And that should make them feel like nice plasticky little LEDs on the end or something like that. Alright, I'm going to go into VPR mode, and I'm actually going to, you can run a preview in the VPR. It's not really recommended because obviously it's going to take a while, but I kind of would like to look at a quick render of this and get a rough idea how it's going to look. Remember, the VPR isn't 100% accurate, but for where we are, it'll do. So I'll just pause this while I make the VPR preview, and then I'll come back and we'll take a look at it together. Okay, there's our preview from frame 100 to the end. And I'm not really reading the luminous sequence that we put on those end lights. So I think we're going to have to look at the intensity values that we have there. So, once again, we'll open up our surface header and we'll pick that first wing light here. And it could be that the intensity value just isn't high enough. So let's crank that right up to 500%. And let's also take our diffuse value for this material and turn it down. Maybe not all the way black, maybe 10% red. We'll do the same thing for the other ones. We'll make the diffuse value 10, and we'll go into each envelope and we'll push the upper value to 500%. Just to see if we can get this to read a little bit better. If it doesn't read in the render, then what's the point, of course? So I've done this 2 methods. One method is increasing the brightest point, and I've also lowered the darkest point by bringing the diffuse value down to 10%. So we should notice something a little bit more now. Make that 500. And I think once we have these lights sorted out, we should do something with these landing gear as well. You notice they're kind of, these feet, you may remember they're like hydraulic hydraulic shafts, so they probably want to push out a little bit as the ship lifts off, and maybe the feet can rotate inwards too to go into a, I don't know, or maybe they rotate outwards to go into a more streamlined flying mode or something. So for now, we'll do another preview and look at those lights after. I think we're going to animate those legs first. So let's get into a nice right hand view of our ship here. We can see our legs, and let's go into a wireframe. The reason I'm going into wireframe is because the ground plane, because we're looking at it directly on edge, will not be visible in a textured view. I'll show you what I mean. If I go to shaded solid, it disappears because there's only an edge. There's no thickness to it at all. So I can see it only really in wireframe mode. And what I'm interested in is the timing of the ship lifting off, which seems to happen right at 164. It leaves. So what we want to happen is over these first 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 8 frames, we want these legs to extend outwards. So I'm going to go back to 164 and set a keyframe only on the Y position for this object. And I'm going to decide right here how far it can push out. Maybe we'll say 171, and I'll put a keyframe on Y, and now I'm going to push it out. You know what? That's as far as it goes out, and I think that's a mistake. I think we need to look at our ship position and put it a little bit lower so we can have those legs in a little bit. So let's open our graph editor, look at the Y position for our ship, and take a close look at these channels. And I think we're going to go back to frame 160 here. We're going to push these. Let me just bring this over here so you can see it. I need to make my graph editor smaller so you can see what I'm doing in the graph editor at the same time. What I want to do is make sure the feet are below the ground plane while it's on the ground so that I can pull them up so that as the ship lifts off they can push out a little bit. So I'm going to push these down, push it down. You know what, that should be plenty. And now I want to grab all 4 of the legs and move them up. There we go. And I'll set that at frame 0. Okay, so now at frame 164, alright, I'll set a keyframe for all of these, and this one I just need to change the value, the Y value that I put on for that. You may recall I changed the value. Okay, so now as we lift up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we can push all of these legs down, and then what it'll look like is it'll look like the pressure is being lifted off of the ship, off of the kind of spongy legs. Okay, do you remember when I set the keyframes to stepped? Well, now I don't want stepped, and they are stepping. So let's open up the graph editor for these guys, and let's change the Y value in all those legs to TCB. I'll just do one leg at a time. And I'm going to go to my options and switch my incoming curve back to TCB spline. Make these all TCB. I see one of the things I need to set up with my graph editor is the option to track item selections, and I like that because what it means is when I switch items from one item to another, like this, it will change in the graph editor as well. So I'll show you what I mean. I'll open up my graph editor, and when I switch to this item, you'll see that the name of the item being tracked changes as well. So once again, go over to the Y, make these all TCB splines, make sure these are all TCB splines on the Y as well. TCB splines. Okay, so that's everything. So that should work a little bit better now. And that's because I have two keyframes next to each other, 169, 170. So I'm going to delete the key on 169. Okay. So that feels a little bit better, except that it's starting to push out beforehand, so we need to take a look at that curve again. Let's take a close look at that Y curve. So we can see that something's happening beforehand because we have TCB splines. Once again, we need to do the ease in, ease out thing. And we'll do that on all four of these. On the Y channel, probably should have just done this when I switch them to TCB splines. But you don't always know this is going to happen until you actually see it. Okay, so you can see that's nice straight incoming and nice straight outgoing as well. So let's take a look at that and see how that looks now. Okay, so it looks like it's not quite lining up with the lift off. The feet are pushing down a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the extreme frame here. I'm just going to hand animate these back in and then clean up the curves after. That's actually not too bad. Okay, now as soon as this thing lifts off, I would like these feet to start folding. So the liftoff happens, they can start folding around frame 175. So we'll call that the beginning, and let's give it a good 75, 85, 95. Let's call it frame 100. So give it a little bit more than a second to move. And at that point, I'd like this guy up like that. Let's take a perspective view at this so we can see exactly what it's going to look like. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. And let's open that graph editor. And once again, this is on the bank, so once again we'll do our little ease in, ease out. Actually, maybe we won't ease it out. Maybe we'll have it come to a hard stop, a clunk at the end as it closes up. And then let's copy that to the other 3 feet. So I'll simply copy that channel and go to this foot, go to its bank envelope, paste, go to this guy's bank envelope and paste it, and then go to the other guy's bank envelope and paste again. Now you might want to add a little bit of variation so they don't all close precisely the same. Let's look at that from the camera view. That'll make it feel a little less CG. So it starts lifting, its feet go into flying configuration. So let's just open up a couple of these and have them close up at slightly different times. So, you know, for example, we might take these and we might just slide them over a little bit. And we might make this one start just slightly later. And maybe this guy we'll put them slightly earlier, but we won't change the duration of the move. And maybe this guy over here, we'll just change the duration. Oops. A little bit later. So there, now we have 4 different motions. Let's just look at that. I'll just go to the shaded solid, and we'll make a preview of that from 100 to 225 and take a look at it. Actually, I want that control handle off there. Okay, so there's our preview with our feet rotating into position, and as I watch this, I realize the feet rotating would look a lot better if they rotated out as the ship lifts off, as though they're spring-loaded to go into that flying kind of sideways configuration. So I'm going to take another look at that. I have a feeling that'll feel a lot more realistic. So let's just grab one of these guys here, and I'm going to just remove his curve for the moment. I'll just remove both of those, and I'm going to rebuild it from the wireframe mode again so I can see the ground plane. So I want it to rotate as the ship lifts off. So the liftoff starts at frame 170. I'm going to keyframe the bank only here. And then as it lifts off, and you really need to go into perspective view here and see this in a shaded solid, I think. So what I'm doing here is I'm letting the foot touching the surface determine how far rotated it is, as though it is actually spring loaded and touching the surface. So we need to make it touch the surface on every frame. I can actually animate it this frame by frame, and that now feels like it's being positioned by actually rubbing against the surface. Let's just take a look at that curve. It's a pretty dirty curve. First of all, it needs to be eased in. It's not great looking. But let's copy it to the other. We'll copy that to the other feet and see how it looks. All right. See how that works for us. It's kind of neat. Let's look at it from the camera view now, and in a shaded solid mode. All right. So here it is in our preview. That actually feels really good. They actually feel kind of spring-loaded now. I really like that. Okay, so we're going to go with that. And we can see that our little light cycle on our wingtips is working in here as well. And there's one other thing I notice. If I just whip back into my VPR, I notice that I can see right through the back, the inside of our ship. I didn't model an interior cabin to this thing, and these polygons are single-sided. So I could either go back into Modeler and model a little box in there to catch the light, or more simple than that, I could simply grab the body material and make it double-sided. So now it's going to be nice and dark inside there, exactly as we want it to be. And if later we decided we want to put an interior and maybe put some kind of lighting in there, that might be interesting too. But that'll be it for now. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our full frame range, and I'm going to make another VPR preview, and then we'll take a look at our scene and see if we're ready to move on. Okay, here's our preview made. Let's play it here and have a look at our animation. So you can see our lights blinking there. We can see the antenna blinking as we animated it. That looks really good. And there's the door slam, and the wing test sequence, and the feet flipping up. So that is all looking really good. I'm pretty satisfied with how that's looking. Next step, we'll move on to creating some particles for this rocket ship.